What happens when one of Hollywood's most adored stars steps into the lion's den, where calm is about to collide with chaos? When the beloved actress, known for her poised demeanor, faces off against one of the sharpest voices in daytime talk, the outcome is anything but predictable. Jennifer Aniston, poised and polished as always, was about to find out. The View studio, normally a space of easy banter and light-hearted moments, suddenly felt like it was on the edge of something bigger. You could feel it in the air, a ripple of anticipation that buzzed in the background. Jennifer wasn't just there to promote her latest project. She was stepping into a conversation that had been brewing for weeks. The tension was almost electric, charged with a recent controversy involving the very co-host sitting just a few chairs away, Sunny Hostin. The cameras were rolling, the audience was watching, and what was about to unfold had the potential to be more explosive than anyone anticipated. Jennifer had been the center of a media storm recently. Her latest film about women reclaiming power in Hollywood had sparked both praise and criticism. But the real drama was happening behind the scenes, and it had everything to do with Sunny's controversial comments about Hollywood privilege. It was subtle at first, an offhand remark that some connected to Jennifer, but it was enough to create a storm on social media. Now, the two women were about to face off live on air. As the show started, the usual banter filled the studio. Light-hearted jokes, a few laughs. But as soon as Jennifer took her seat and the conversation turned to empowerment, everything changed. Sunny Hostin, known for her directness, leaned in, ready to speak her truth. "Jennifer," she began, her voice steady but laced with an edge, "I think the film raises important points about women and aging in Hollywood. But don't you think it's hard to talk about empowerment when some people in this industry have benefited from systems that exclude others?" Jennifer's smile didn't fade, but her eyes sharpened. She met Sunny's gaze with a calm that almost seemed too composed. "Could you clarify what you mean by that?" she asked, her tone gentle but curious. Sunny didn't hesitate. "I mean, how can we talk about women supporting women when some voices in Hollywood, especially those with privilege, chose silence on issues like pay inequality and diversity until it was convenient?" The studio air grew thick with tension. The audience felt it too. Nervous laughter spread across the room, but the discomfort was unmistakable. Jennifer, ever the professional, kept her composure. She took a deep breath, ready to respond. "I think it's dangerous to assume that silence equals complicity," Jennifer said, her voice steady but firm. "People process things differently. Just because someone doesn't speak out doesn't mean they aren't fighting for change in other ways." Sunny's gaze didn't waver. But silence can protect the system. It allows it to continue unchallenged. Jennifer didn't back down. Sometimes leading by example quietly can make more of an impact than shouting. Not every fight has to be loud to be effective. Sunny's eyes narrowed slightly. The clash between the two women was unavoidable. And as the conversation unfolded, one thing was clear. This wasn't just an interview. This was a moment that would define how Hollywood and women in power are seen by the world. The studio was quiet now, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. It wasn't just the usual heated debate on The View. This was something different. This was personal. Jennifer's calm, measured responses were starting to show cracks. Sunny's relentless pursuit of the truth was pushing the conversation to places it had never gone before. "You know," Jennifer said, her tone still calm but with a sharper edge now, "it's dangerous to assume that those of us who don't speak out on every issue are complicit. We all have different ways of processing our role in this industry." Sunny didn't flinch. "But isn't your silence a form of complicity? Especially when people with influence choose not to speak about the inequality that's been a part of Hollywood for decades?" Jennifer leaned forward slightly, her gaze never leaving Sunny's. "And sometimes," she countered, her voice steady but firm, "silence is a choice to reflect and act in ways that don't always fit the narrative people want to push." The room held its breath. It wasn't just a disagreement. It was a collision of two worlds. Jennifer, the seasoned actress, accustomed to playing the role of the gracious, lovable public figure. Sunny, the fearless journalist, determined to make sure the uncomfortable truths about privilege and power were brought to the forefront. Jennifer's calm demeanor, however, seemed to be cracking under the pressure. The grace that had been her trademark for years was beginning to show the wear and tear of living under the microscope. She wasn't angry, not in the traditional sense. But there was something in her eyes, a flicker of vulnerability, something the cameras couldn't quite capture. "I've spent years building a career, supporting women behind the scenes without the need for credit," Jennifer said, her voice trembling slightly, betraying a hint of emotion. "But it seems like all people see is the easy life that comes with privilege, and they don't see the work that goes into it." "The quiet work," Sunny nodded, her tone respectful but unwavering. "I get that, Jennifer. I really do. But what I'm asking is, when do we, the ones with a voice, take responsibility for using it? Especially when we have a platform to change things?" Jennifer paused. Her lips parted as if to respond, but she took a slow breath instead. She was still composed, but the conversation was no longer one of just words. It was about perception, power, and who held the microphone. "I don't think it's about being silent, Sunny," Jennifer said softly, meeting her gaze. "It's about choosing when and how to use your voice. Shouting doesn't make you stronger. Sometimes, quiet is the most powerful form of strength." Sunny's eyes locked onto Jennifer's, and for the first time in the conversation, there was a flicker of understanding in her gaze. But the moment was fleeting. The fight for control of the narrative was far from over. As the tension built, the producers did what they could to steer the conversation in another direction. But the damage had been done. The audience was glued to their seats, watching in stunned silence as the two women, each with their own truth, fought to be heard, and yet, despite their differing perspectives, something else lingered in the air. A quiet acknowledgement that both women, in their own ways, were fighting for what they believed in, fighting for their voices to matter. Whoopi, sensing the rising storm, quickly intervened. All right, she said, trying to diffuse the situation with a light-hearted laugh. "Before this turns into a full-blown war, let's take a quick break. We'll be right back." The break didn't ease the tension, it only made it worse. As the cameras cut, crew members exchanged nervous glances. The producers and assistants scrambled backstage, wondering just how the fallout from this moment would unfold. The studio lights dimmed for a brief moment of respite, but the tension backstage was anything but calming. The crew moved like soldiers, exchanging nervous glances as they prepared for the next round. Back in the dressing rooms, the atmosphere was thick with unspoken words. Jennifer sat in her chair, hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her eyes were fixed on the monitors, but her mind was elsewhere. She wasn't replaying the words that had been said, but instead the silence that followed, the awkwardness that had settled into the room like a heavy fog. She was used to difficult interviews, but this was different. She hadn't expected this particular battle. Her publicist approached her, trying to offer some reassurance, but Jennifer waved them off. She needed a moment, just a brief moment to process. She leaned back in her chair, the hum of the studio growing distant as she stared into the quiet chaos of the room. Meanwhile, Sunny, too, was processing the weight of the encounter. Her sharp mind was already working through the conversation, analyzing every word, every look. Was she too harsh? Did she push too far? The internet had already exploded with reactions, and both women were at the center of it. Backstage, Sunny stood in front of her mirror, touching up her makeup, but her reflection seemed distant. She wasn't focused on the next segment, or on the show's ongoing drama. She was focused on the battle she had just waged and whether she had truly gone too far. The door to her dressing room opened, and Anna Navarro stepped in with a soft smile. "You did it," Anna said quietly. "You asked the questions no one else would." "You had to do it," Sunny turned, meeting Anna's gaze. "But at what cost?" She replied, her voice tinged with uncertainty. She had done her job, challenged Hollywood's glossed-over truths, but now she couldn't shake the feeling that the confrontation had moved beyond the issue of privilege. It had become something much more personal. Anna paused, choosing her words carefully. "You didn't attack her. You ask the hard questions. But the world isn't ready for those kinds of questions. especially when they involve someone as beloved as Jennifer. The words hit Sunny harder than expected. Was she really just doing her job? Or had she become a villain in the eyes of the public for doing exactly what she was supposed to? The lines between right and wrong were increasingly blurred, and no one could predict how this would play out. The show resumed, but there was no return to normalcy. The usual banter between the hosts seemed forced, lacking the usual warmth and spontaneity. Whoopi tried to lighten the mood with her trademark humor, but it fell flat. The audience, no longer sure how to react, shifted uneasily in their seats. Back on set, Jennifer took her seat once more, but this time her demeanor was different. There was no longer any pretense of composure. It was as though the conversation had stripped her of the facade she had carefully constructed over the years. The calm, poised actress was still there, but now there was something deeper, something raw that hadn't been there before. As Sunny took her seat beside her, the air was thick with unresolved tension. The producers hoped that a shift in tone would bring things back to a friendly vibe, but no one was fooled. What was about to unfold was a delicate balance of truth and perception, a battle not just over words but over who would control the narrative. Whoopi, sensing the heaviness in the room, quickly addressed the elephant in the room. "All right," she began, leaning in with a light-hearted chuckle. "Before we start World War III again, let's just clarify a few things." The audience chuckled nervously, the unease palpable. Whoopi continued. "Let's talk it out, okay? Let's be real, but let's keep it civil." But civil was the last thing on anyone's mind. Sunny, calm but firm, turned to Jennifer. "You mentioned something last week about women tearing each other down under the banner of empowerment. Can you expand on that?" Jennifer nodded, but there was a slight tension in her posture. "I meant that there's an expectation for women, particularly in the public eye, to prove they are enough, to be angry enough, vocal enough to constantly challenge the system. But sometimes that's not what empowerment looks like. It's about choosing when and how to use your voice. Empowerment is personal. It's not a competition." The response hit Sunny like a punch to the gut. "But don't you think that sometimes those who choose silence make it harder for others to speak? When you have the privilege to speak, you have the responsibility to use that voice. It's not just about choosing when to speak. Silence allows inequality to continue." Jennifer met her gaze, her voice unwavering. "Silence doesn't always mean compliance. Some of us fight in ways that aren't as loud, but still meaningful." Sunny's expression hardened, but she kept her voice even. "And sometimes silence is just a shield that protects the powerful." The room grew still. Jennifer's calm had turned to steel. Sunny's intellectual fire had turned to defiance. Neither woman was backing down. As the conversation continued, the real battle was no longer about Hollywood, privilege, or inequality. It was about perception. Who could control the story? The tension between Jennifer and Sunny had become more than just a disagreement. It had become a fight for the truth, for clarity, and for the future of how women are seen in public. The cameras cut to a commercial break, but the tension that had simmered on air continued to reverberate through the studio. In the control room, producers were scrambling, whispering urgently about how to handle the aftermath of what had just unfolded. This wasn't just another segment. It was a defining moment that had the potential to alter the trajectory of the show. Backstage, Jennifer sat quietly, taking deep breaths as she tried to calm the storm inside her. She wasn't angry, not in the traditional sense. But there was a certain sadness that lingered, an exhaustion from having to fight a battle that no one had warned her she'd be stepping into. As her publicist entered the room, she smiled faintly, but it didn't reach her eyes. "How are you holding up?" her publicist asked, voice laced with concern. Jennifer nodded, her lips pressed into a thin line. "I'm fine," she said, though her tone told a different story. "I just need to step away for a moment." Her assistant came to her side, offering her a cup of tea, but Jennifer waved it away. She wasn't ready to face the press yet, not with the world watching. What had started as a normal day of interviews had transformed into a viral spectacle. The media was already tearing apart every word, every glance between her and Sunny. The world was waiting for her next move. Across the hall, Sunny wasn't faring much better. She paced her dressing room, her mind racing. She had done her job, right? She had asked the tough questions, exposed the raw truths that others often avoided. But why did it feel so much heavier than it had before? Had she gone too far? Or was this simply the price of doing what she knew was right? As she sat down to compose herself, she couldn't escape the feedback rolling in. Her phone was buzzing non-stop with messages pouring in from fans and critics alike. Some applauded her bravery. Others accused her of disrespecting Jennifer. But the worst part was the overwhelming feeling that this moment was bigger than both of them. This was no longer just an interview. It was a cultural flashpoint. Within hours, the internet had exploded. Team Jennifer and hotter Team Sunny were trending worldwide, with fans of both women fiercely defending their chosen side. Reactions flooded Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and every major news outlet. Commentators dissected every word, every pause, every flicker of emotion on camera. The world was divided. Jennifer's supporters praised her for her calm, for staying poised under the pressure. They admired her for using her platform to show that power doesn't always have to be loud. Grace under fire, they called it. They couldn't understand why Sunny had pushed so hard, especially in a moment that was supposed to be about promoting Jennifer's film, not launching a public debate. On the other side, Sunny's supporters hailed her for standing up to the Hollywood elite, for asking the tough questions that others were too scared to ask. They believed she was doing what needed to be done, challenging the status quo and calling out the hypocrisy that had long plagued the industry. To them, Jennifer's calm demeanor seemed like a convenient escape from the uncomfortable truths being put on the table. As the online discourse raged on, ABC was caught in the crossfire. The network's PR team scrambled to contain the situation, issuing statements that sought to downplay the confrontation as an innocent debate, a difference of opinion. But the more they tried to spin it, the more the story took on a life of its own. Jennifer and Sunny were no longer just celebrities. They had become symbols of the broader conversation about power, privilege, and the responsibility of those who wield influence. Despite the growing frenzy, Jennifer and Sunny chose silence. Neither of them responded to the countless media requests for comments. Jennifer went about her day, but there was a new weight to her movements, a quiet sense of resolve that hadn't been there before. She had handled the interview with grace, but now, as the headlines continued to pile up, she couldn't shake the feeling that the public had missed the point entirely. Sunny, too, remained quiet. She spent the evening with her family, the noise of the outside world muffled by the love and comfort of her home. Her teenage son had watched the interview, and she could see the concern in his eyes. "Mom," he had asked, "do you think you went too far?" Her response had been simple, though the doubt still lingered. "No," she had said firmly. "I was just doing my job." But the questions kept echoing in her mind. Had she pushed too hard? Had she been too forceful? Or had Jennifer simply not been ready to confront the difficult questions? Either way, the storm was far from over. Days passed, and the internet continued to churn. But something was shifting. Behind the scenes, ABC worked hard to arrange a follow-up segment, a chance to clarify the tension that had consumed the previous interview. It was a rare opportunity for the two women to address the fallout, to make sense of what had happened. Jennifer arrived at the studio early that morning, wearing an understated outfit. Beige, the kind of color that blended in, but still exuded elegance. She was prepared to face the storm, but this time, there was no script. No rehearsed lines. Just two women who had spoken their truths in front of millions, now tasked with finding some form of closure. Sunny walked in shortly after, dressed in navy. Her presence was commanding, unapologetic, but there was something different about her today. The edge that had defined her voice in the past was tempered, just slightly. The producers, sensing the shift, set the stage. This wouldn't be another battle, it would be a conversation. But the weight of the previous conversation hung heavy in the air. Would they be able to reconcile, or would the cracks between them remain? The studio was silent as the cameras rolled. This wasn't just another segment. It was a defining moment. A chance for Jennifer and Sunny to confront not only each other, but everything that had been said, felt, and misunderstood. The weight of the last week hung in the air like a storm cloud, and as Jennifer stepped onto the stage, the audience could feel the tension in their bones. Jennifer entered the studio with a calm that wasn't just practiced, it was deliberate. She wasn't here to play the role of the celebrity. She wasn't here to smile through the discomfort. This time, her presence wasn't a performance. It was a statement. She knew exactly what she was walking into, and she was prepared to face it head-on. Sunny, too, had changed. The sharp edge that had marked her previous confrontations was gone. Now there was only focus, a determination to make her point heard without crossing the line again. She wasn't here for a fight, not this time. She was here for clarity. She was here to show that asking the tough questions wasn't an attack, but a means of growth. As Jennifer took her seat beside Sunny, the atmosphere in the studio shifted. The energy was still there, but it was different. There was a newfound respect in the room, a shared understanding that they weren't enemies. They were two women with differing perspectives, trying to make sense of their positions in an industry that often demanded they be either heroes or villains. The real battle now was not between them, but between the expectations of the public and the truth they were both grappling with. Whoopee, sensing the need for balance, broke the silence with a light-hearted laugh. "All right, folks," she said, her voice easing the room. "Before this turns into another viral moment, let's clarify what happened last week. We're here to talk it out, right?" The audience chuckled nervously, but the energy had shifted. Jennifer and Sunny were no longer on opposing sides. They were sitting at the same table, ready to find common ground. The conversation began slowly, with Whoopi guiding the two women into a more neutral space. "Jennifer," she began, "you said something last week that stuck with a lot of people about women tearing each other down under the banner of empowerment. Can you explain that further?" Jennifer's eyes met Sunny's, but this time there was no defensive guard. She had already spoken her truth, and now it was about explaining it, about showing the world that her choice to remain silent was not weakness, but a quiet strength. "I think there's this unspoken expectation," Jennifer started, her voice steady but thoughtful, "that women, especially those in the public eye, have to be constantly proving that they are enough, that they have to be loud enough, angry enough to be seen as powerful. But I don't think that's what empowerment looks like. I think it's more personal than that. It's about owning your voice, your journey, without needing to shout about it." The audience listened intently. Jennifer's words, once said in the heat of the moment, now felt like a calm rebuke to the expectations placed on her. And all women in Hollywood. Sunny listened, her lips pressed together in concentration. She respected Jennifer's stance, but she wasn't done. "I hear you, Jennifer, but I also think we need to be real about privilege. There are women who don't have the luxury of choosing when to speak. For them, silence isn't a choice. It's invisibility. It's a lack of opportunity to be heard. And when people like you, who have a platform, stay silent, it reinforces that system." There it was again, the core of the debate: power, silence, and the responsibility to use your voice. Jennifer leaned forward, her gaze unwavering. "I understand that, Sunny. I really do. But I don't think silence should be seen as complicity. Some of us choose to fight in different ways. The idea that we have to shout to make a difference, that doesn't sit right with me." The conversation hung in the air, suspended between them. Both women, having expressed their truths, were now searching for a way to reconcile their differing perspectives. Sunny's tone softened just a little. "And maybe you're right. Maybe silence isn't always complicity. But sometimes silence protects the system that keeps people like me from being heard." Jennifer's eyes softened in understanding. "But sometimes silence allows us the space to listen, to really listen." And just like that, the conversation shifted from confrontation to connection. Both women, who had been at odds just days ago, were now engaged in a dialogue that wasn't about winning or losing. It was about understanding each other. The tension was still there, but now it was wrapped in respect, not conflict. The studio was still, the audience hanging on every word. But for the first time in the entire interview, there was a sense of calm between Jennifer and Sunny. As the cameras cut, the weight of the moment lingered. For the first time in days, the air in the studio felt lighter, as though the two women had shared something deeply personal and transformative. The producers, sensing the shift, prepared to wrap up the segment, but there was still something left unsaid. Jennifer and Sunny exchanged a quiet glance as the audience applauded. It wasn't just applause for the segment. It was applause for the maturity both women had shown in facing each other, for setting aside their egos and finding common ground. When the segment ended, Jennifer stood and shook hands with everyone at the table, including Sunny. As she reached her, she paused for just a moment that spoke volumes. "Thank you for the conversation," Jennifer said softly, her voice carrying a weight that wasn't there before. Sunny smiled, her eyes softening for the first time during the entire ordeal. "Always," she replied, her voice quieter now, with a depth that hadn't been there before. Jennifer turned to walk off stage, her heels clicking against the floor with a finality that signaled the end of the confrontation. But the echoes of their words remained. Outside the studio, the world was waiting for their next move, but for Jennifer and Sunny, the battle was over. In the end, it wasn't about who won or lost. It was about the courage to speak, the strength to listen, and the grace to accept differing truths. The internet would continue to debate the moment, the public would choose sides. But inside that studio, something rare had happened. Two women had found a way to disagree and still walk away with respect. So, what do you think? Was Jennifer right to defend her calm? Was Sunny justified in challenging her truth? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of Hollywood's most powerful moments, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more explosive celebrity confrontations, behind-the-scenes truths, and real conversations. Hit that like button, ring the bell, and stay tuned for more stories that you won't want to miss. Because the conversation doesn't end here. Stay connected, and we'll see you in the next video.